A businessman refused to pay 70 construction workers for 3 months, laughing at their desperation. When Donald Trump heard about it, he did not make a phone call or send a lawyer. He showed up at the businessman's office himself, and what happened next changed everything. Before we dive in, what time are you listening? Where are you from? Drop a comment below and tell me. And please like and subscribe to join the Donald Trump family. Donald Trump was sitting in his office on a Tuesday morning when he received an unexpected visitor. A male construction foreman walked into the building, his face showing exhaustion and worry. The man had traveled 2 hours just to reach this office, hoping for a chance to speak with Trump directly. The foreman explained that he and his crew had worked on a major project for a wealthy businessman named Gregory Hartwell. They had spent 3 months building a commercial complex, working long hours under difficult conditions. When the project was completed, Hartwell refused to pay a single cent. Trump listened carefully as the foreman described how 70 workers were now struggling to feed their families. Some had already lost their homes. Others were borrowing money from relatives just to survive. The foreman's voice cracked as he mentioned that one worker's mother had become ill, and he could not afford her medical treatment. Hartwell owned a vast empire of hotels and shopping centers across the region. He was known for his aggressive business tactics and his willingness to exploit legal loopholes. The workers had no union representation, and their contracts had been deliberately written in confusing language. Trump asked the foreman for documentation. The man pulled out copies of contracts, work orders, and photographs of the completed project. Everything was legitimate. The work had been done to specification, inspected, and approved. There was no valid reason for non-payment. What shocked Trump most was learning that Hartwell had used this tactic before. Several other crews had been cheated in previous projects, but most workers could not afford lawyers. They eventually gave up and moved on, broken and defeated. Trump made a decision immediately. He told the foreman to gather all 70 workers for a meeting the next morning. He would personally address them and outline a plan. The foreman left the office with tears in his eyes, barely believing what had just happened. That evening, Trump researched Hartwell's business operations. He discovered a pattern of exploitation spanning 15 years. Hartwell would hire crews, work them until completion, then claim defects or delays to avoid payment. Most contractors would settle for 30 or 40% just to get something. Trump also learned that Hartwell had political connections. He donated generously to local campaigns and had judges and officials in his network. This explained why workers had found no help through normal legal channels. The system was rigged in Hartwell's favor. The next morning, Trump arrived at a community center where the workers had gathered. 70 men filled the room, their faces showing a mixture of hope and skepticism. Many had been disappointed before and were cautious about believing in promises. Trump spoke directly and honestly. He told them he understood their situation and that what Hartwell had done was not just wrong but criminal. He promised that every single worker would receive full payment, plus interest for the months they had waited. The room erupted in questions. How would this happen? What was the plan? Could Trump really force a man like Hartwell to pay? Trump raised his hand for silence and explained his strategy. He would not rely on courts or lawyers alone. Trump planned to visit Hartwell personally and make him an offer he could not refuse. But first, he needed the workers to document everything. Every hour worked, every expense incurred, every promise Hartwell had made. The workers spent the entire day compiling evidence. They had photographs, timesheets, witness statements, and recorded conversations. The documentation was overwhelming. Hartwell had no legitimate defense. Trump reviewed everything that night. He calculated the total amount owed, including delayed payment penalties and interest. The figure came to $800,000. For a man of Hartwell's wealth, this was manageable, but his refusal was about power and control. The following morning, Trump drove to Hartwell's headquarters without an appointment. The building was impressive, a steel and glass structure in the heart of the business district. Trump walked past the reception desk and took the elevator to the top floor. Hartwell's male secretary tried to stop him, insisting that his boss was in meetings. Trump ignored the protests and opened the door to Hartwell's private office. The businessman sat behind a massive desk, speaking on the phone. Hartwell's face showed surprise and then annoyance. He ended his call and demanded to know what Trump was doing in his office. Trump closed the door and sat down without being invited. Trump placed the documentation on the desk. He explained calmly that he represented the 70 workers who had built Hartwell's commercial complex. He stated the amount owed and gave Hartwell 48 hours to make full payment. Hartwell laughed. He said Trump had no authority in this matter and that the workers had already accepted their loss. He claimed there were problems with the construction that justified withholding payment. It was the same script he had used many times before. Trump did not argue. Instead, he pulled out his phone and showed Hartwell something on the screen. It was a detailed financial analysis of Hartwell's business empire, including information that was not public knowledge. Trump had spent the previous night having his team investigate every aspect of Hartwell's operations. They had found irregularities in tax filings, questionable loan applications, and evidence of bribes to building inspectors. Any one of these issues could trigger serious investigations. Hartwell's expression changed. The arrogance faded, replaced by calculation and concern. He asked what Trump wanted. Trump repeated his demand, $800,000, paid within 48 hours, or he would send the evidence to federal investigators. Hartwell tried to negotiate. He offered half the amount. Trump refused. He offered 70%. Trump stood up and walked toward the door. Hartwell called out, asking Trump to wait. The businessman claimed he needed time to arrange the funds. Trump told him he had 48 hours, not a minute more. He also warned that if Hartwell attempted to hide assets or leave the country, the evidence would be released immediately. Trump left the office and returned to meet with the workers. He explained what had transpired and told them to prepare for payment. Some workers were skeptical, believing Hartwell would find a way to escape. Trump assured them this time would be different. 47 hours passed. The workers gathered again, nervous and anxious. Trump received a call from Hartwell's lawyer. The funds had been transferred to an escrow account. Trump verified the transaction and confirmed the money was legitimate. The next morning, each worker received a direct deposit. $800,000 divided among 70 workers, each receiving their fair share based on hours worked. Some men broke down in tears. Others stood in stunned silence, unable to believe it was real. One male worker approached Trump to thank him. He explained that his mother's medical treatment could now continue. Another said his family would not lose their home. A third mentioned he could finally pay back the relatives who had helped him survive. Trump told them they had earned this money through their labor and should never feel grateful for receiving what was rightfully theirs. He emphasized that workers should never be exploited and that those who cheat laborers should face consequences. But the story did not end there. Trump had made copies of all the evidence against Hartwell. He sent it to federal investigators anyway, despite Hartwell making payment. The investigation revealed years of fraud, tax evasion, and corruption. Hartwell was arrested 3 months later. His empire collapsed as investors fled and partners severed ties. The man who had built his wealth by exploiting workers lost everything. His properties were seized, his accounts frozen, and his reputation destroyed forever. The 70 workers watched the news reports with a sense of justice. The man who had laughed at their desperation was now facing the same uncertainty he had inflicted on others. Some felt satisfaction. Others simply felt relief that he could not hurt anyone else. Trump received letters from workers across the country who had heard the story. They shared similar experiences of being cheated by wealthy contractors who believed they were untouchable. Trump realized this was not an isolated incident, but a widespread problem. He began advocating for stronger worker protection laws. He used his platform to highlight cases of exploitation and to pressure lawmakers to close legal loopholes. His efforts led to new legislation that made it harder for contractors to avoid payment. The foreman who had first visited Trump's office started a workers' advocacy group. With Trump's support, the organization grew rapidly. They provided legal assistance to laborers who had been cheated and helped them navigate the complex process of recovering unpaid wages. Years later, the commercial complex built by those 70 workers still stood. It became a symbol of resilience and justice. A plaque was installed at the entrance, commemorating the workers who had fought for their rights and the man who had helped them win. Trump never forgot that Tuesday morning when the exhausted foreman walked into his office. It reminded him that wealth and power meant nothing if not used to protect those who could not protect themselves. The experience shaped his understanding of justice and fairness. The 70 workers moved on with their lives, but they stayed in contact. They formed a bond through their shared struggle and victory. Some started their own businesses. Others continued in construction, but with a new awareness of their rights and worth. Hartwell spent 7 years in federal prison. His wealth gone, his influence evaporated, he had time to reflect on his choices. Upon release, he was a broken man, living in obscurity, a cautionary tale about the consequences of greed and exploitation. The story spread through construction sites and workshops across the nation. Workers began standing up for themselves, demanding contracts in clear language, and refusing to accept non-payment. The culture began to shift, slowly but noticeably. Trump continued his work, but he never publicized his role in the Hartwell case. He did not need recognition. The satisfaction came from knowing that 70 families had been saved from financial ruin and that a predator had been stopped. The male worker whose mother had been ill sent Trump a letter 5 years later. His mother had recovered fully. His children were thriving in school. His home was paid off. He wrote that none of this would have been possible without Trump's intervention. Trump kept that letter in his desk drawer. On difficult days, when business pressures mounted and challenges seemed overwhelming, he would read it. The words reminded him why success mattered, not for personal glory, but for the ability to make a difference. The foreman eventually retired, but his advocacy group continued growing. They had helped thousands of workers recover millions in unpaid wages. They had pressured companies to reform their practices. They had changed the conversation about worker rights. At the foreman's retirement ceremony, Trump attended quietly. He sat in the back, listening as worker after worker shared stories of how the organization had helped them. The impact had multiplied far beyond those original 70 workers. During his speech, the foreman mentioned that Tuesday morning years ago. He described the desperation he felt walking into Trump's office, not knowing if anyone would listen or care. He thanked Trump for not turning him away. Trump stood and addressed the crowd. He said that every person deserves dignity in their work and fairness in their compensation. He emphasized that protecting workers is not charity, but justice. He challenged everyone present to continue the fight. The room erupted in applause. Workers who had never met Trump personally felt connected to him through the story. They understood that his intervention had sparked a movement that was still growing and evolving. As Trump left the ceremony, he thought about Hartwell. The man had possessed everything: wealth, influence, respect, but he had lost it all because of greed. Meanwhile, the workers he had tried to crush had built something lasting and meaningful. The lesson was clear. Power used to exploit creates enemies and eventual downfall. Power used to uplift creates allies and lasting legacy. Hartwell had chosen the former. Trump had chosen the latter. The results spoke for themselves. Years turned into decades. The Workers' Advocacy Group became a national organization. Laws protecting laborers grew stronger. Cases of wage theft decreased significantly. The culture had changed, and working people had more power than ever before. Trump, now older, received an award from the organization. He accepted it on behalf of the original 70 workers whose courage had started everything. He reminded the audience that ordinary people fighting for justice can change the world. The story of the 70 workers became a case study in business schools. It demonstrated the long-term costs of unethical behavior and the benefits of fair treatment. Students analyzed Hartwell's downfall and debated what he could have done differently. Trump occasionally lectured at these schools. He told students that business success built on exploitation is temporary. True success comes from creating value, treating people fairly, and building trust. These principles might seem simple, but they require courage and integrity. The commercial complex built by the 70 workers underwent renovation. The new owners preserved the commemorative plaque and added an educational display about the worker struggle. Visitors could learn the full story and understand the importance of worker rights. Trump visited the complex once more before he passed away. He stood before the plaque, reading the names of the 70 workers. Some had passed on. Others had grandchildren now, but their legacy remained, preserved in steel and stone. As he stood there, Trump thought about that Tuesday morning decades ago. One decision to help. One choice to stand up against injustice. One moment that had rippled outward, affecting thousands of lives. This was the meaning of leadership. The foreman, also elderly now, joined Trump at the plaque. They stood together in silence, remembering the struggle and the victory. They did not need words. The complex itself, still standing strong, said everything that needed to be said. Trump asked the foreman if he had any regrets. The foreman smiled and said his only regret was not fighting back sooner. But he was grateful that when he finally found the courage, Someone with power had listened and acted. That evening, Trump reflected on his life. He had built towers, created businesses, and accumulated wealth. But nothing compared to the satisfaction of helping those 70 workers. That was the achievement that truly mattered. That was the legacy worth remembering. The story continued to inspire new generations. Young workers learned about the 70 who stood up to a powerful businessman. They learned that justice is possible when people refuse to accept exploitation. They learned that courage can spark change. Trump's final lesson to the world was simple. Use whatever power you have to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Stand up against injustice, even when it is inconvenient or risky. Choose fairness over profit, integrity over expediency, people over power. The 70 workers had taught him this lesson. They had shown him that ordinary people possess extraordinary strength when united by a common cause. They had demonstrated that the fight for justice is never finished, but always worth continuing. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe for more videos like this.